When we have visitors, they often ask the question, how do you cope with a garden this large? You must spend a lot of time gardening. And yes, we do spend a fair amount of time in the garden, but it's because that's where we like to be. But not nearly as much as I think people maybe imagine that we do. The fact is that there are a number of techniques that you can utilize in the garden which do reduce the amount of time that you need to spend. And so we thought we'd talk about some of those today. So we've written down a few points that we'll go over.
How do I look after my part of the garden, the flowers? Easy. I'm not in it that much, though people think I must because it's so big. I find the more plants you have, the less work it is. You would think that isn't the case, but it is, because you have less weeds because there is so many plants to suppress the weeds. And then also I accept weeds in my garden, whatever people call weeds.
Don't strive for perfection.
Yes, I used to be that everything had to be just perfect, but I've become more relaxed as time goes on, very accepting of how things can look in the garden. I do always say the joke of I wish my plants would behave themselves and stand upright and not flop over in the wind, but that's okay, it's part of it. So I have, as time goes on, more and more plants makes less work because they make dark areas on the ground, so what is commonly called a weed doesn't want to grow. And then there are areas that you think you got rid of every inch of whatever that weed may be, and they just love to come back. So some areas you just say, okay, you just have to be here, and you don't fuss about it. But mostly it is just more plants, less work. And in the springtime, I would say that I'm perhaps an hour, 2 hours in the whole week, just in the garden, little clipbacks of roses and some plants that have finished flowering. And in the winter time, I clip back the roses. I do it over a couple of days just to make it easy for myself physically.
All the things that apply in the flower garden also apply in your veggie garden. And same as more plants in the flower garden achieve less weeds, getting the right density of plants in the veggie garden also works. And as you'll see, I use planting at the optimum density is one of the best ways. With my potatoes, for example, I plant them so that once they actually grow up, they're going to achieve full cover and there's no space for the weeds to come through. Yes, I do mulch as well, but the actual achieving cover with the plants is a really good thing. But you still don't want to pack them too tight in the veggie garden, because if plants are too close together, they can choke each other a little bit and you start to actually lose optimum growth for that plant. So it takes a little bit of learning what space each plant needs, but once you've worked that out, it really helps. As I mentioned with the potatoes, mulching is one of the main techniques that you can use in the veggie garden really to reduce your workload. It works both from the perspective of reducing weed growth, but it also, of course, keeps moisture in the soil, so it reduces the amount of watering that you need to do. So utilising mulches is just a fantastic way of reducing your workload in the garden. Sometimes, of course, you're going to have to buy those mulches and it does increase your costs. Some people are in the fortunate situation they can get mulches for free or they're producing them themselves. If you can't afford to buy mulches, the other method to use is to use what's known as a dust mulch, where you're using a tool like a wheel hoe to actually cultivate the soil fairly regularly after it's had rain or after your water, so that the top half inch of the soil is dry and loose and basically dust. That actually stops the weed germination in that because it's so dry, and it also stops the moisture evaporation.
Some areas that are a bit more open in the garden, I mulch. Where I have my standard roses, they have natural mulching from the bluebells. So some areas don't feel the need to pull every leaf out when they've gone yellow. because the bulbs will just dry their leaves out on the area. At the beginning it can look a bit messy, but actually that has stopped common weeds turning up. When the wisteria drops its leaves, I rake them up and put them on this one particular garden area where my sand roses are, and that becomes a mulch sort of something. Yeah, I know you've mentioned black plastic here and there, but in your garden bed as a maintenance thing, as a, you know, as a reminder, like say in the garden beds where you're not using them, to cover them up to make less weeds for later, and to keep it dry perhaps as well if you want it not to be
Yes,
muddy.
I'm not sure what category you put that under. Flag away. I'm not sure what category you put that under, whether you turn that as mulch or what, but it is basically weed maintenance and reduction is to use a cover over the areas that you're not actually growing in at the time. I tend to use plastic over winter because it keeps the soil a little bit drier and also warmer, as well as suppressing the weeds. And often I have green manure under that's composting, being eaten by the worms. But you can use cardboard, you can use newspaper, you can use just straw as a mulch, whatever you've got available.
I find for ground covers, there are some great ground covers as a replacement to regular wood chip pine bark mulching instead of, and they will gradually creep over and be instead of, and you've got to choose the right ones though that don't take over and swallow the plant, ones that just really want to stay flat. So I have achieved finding some of those.
Using ground covers is a little bit like the more plants concept, isn't it? But it's using the right plant that's going to be low and go underneath that is going to suppress the weeds.
Yeah, they just want to stay low and not take over your plant. I have had that happen. And so having the right ground cover can be a real ultimate, because you've got to plant a nice flower often with it as well. So as time goes on, you learn more about what you should have done, and we found having our wood boxes as garden beds a very good thing, and mow over edges we added later, because grass always wants to grow in, and maybe you didn't get to the mowing quick enough or the whippersnipping. No matter what, your grass seeds will want to come in. So garden boxes and mow over edges are definitely good, makes your life easier.
The same as using garden boxes in the flower garden. Using raised beds or boxes in your veggie garden is really helpful. The other thing that I find really good is actually having paths in the veggie garden. I use concrete, which a lot of people don't like, but you can use other methods. You could use wood chip or something like that if you don't like concrete. But not having weeds growing in your paths, that saves a lot of your time, because you're not wasting time keeping the path clean. And also you're able to get around better, particularly when it's wet. If you've been watering, it's not getting muddy, and it's really helpful.
So in the house and outside the house, a little attention often goes a long way. And so I found in the garden, like I would say once a week, I go for a real hard go around. I start at one end of my garden room and work my way through, and I would expect about 2 hours possibly that I'm in the garden for once a week. And so just little clip back, see what needs to be done basically. And it doesn't take long to get around, and I don't see garden as work, because I really enjoy it. It's just for fun.
Again, in the veggie garden, that regular attention, and being regular, of course, you don't have to do a lot, so that I try and get in the veggie garden 2 or 3 times a week and run around and do a few jobs. And look, often it's only half an hour, sometimes it takes a bit longer depending. I tend to spend a lot more time in the veggie garden, of course, in planting season and harvest season, but when it's the maintenance time, it doesn't take a lot.
You'll find that with maintenance it is different all year round, you know, for all the different seasons, how things are growing. So it'll vary how much time, but it really doesn't take long if, like I said, you do it often. So every week you have a go over what area needs to be done, and you'll see soon. And I find writing a list as the year goes on, okay, I must do this, I must do that. Then it'll make sure that you do it if it's really important. A tick list always works, just so you don't forget, because you always find you'll go back out there, oh yeah, I forgot to do that. So a reminder list can be good, or just a go walk everywhere and make it happen.
The other job that can be quite time consuming in a garden is watering, particularly as you move into drier times of the year. And look, there's two things that will help with that. One is having established inbuilt watering systems. We don't have a lot of those because of the nature of our water supply. The other is using a sprinkler that covers a fair area. If you're able to water in mass, then of course it's a lot easier. For us, we're only able to run the one sprinkler at a time, and so we have to go and move it fairly regularly. But it's still a lot easier and a lot faster than hand watering. While a lot of people like hand watering from the point of view that it gets them out in the garden and enjoying the garden, it's still really time consuming to stand there and just wait for a plant to get enough water from a hose. Whereas, you know, if you've got a sprinkler, you can be doing some of those other jobs that need to be done.
I do have pots in my garden which add a new element to the garden character, and some areas it lifts the plant up higher, but every summer I have the moment of maybe I shouldn't have pots, just put the plant in the ground. So I do sometimes go around and hand water with the hose the pots, because what if they're just a little bit dry? They do dry out quite fast, but with the sprinkler you hope that it gets enough area. So sometimes I wonder, perhaps I should not have any pots.
Pots can be quite a burden, can't they? Particularly if you go away at all, then
Yes,
they
they dry
can
out
be quite
very
an
fast.
issue. But yes, they dry out so fast you have to be back to water them more frequently than something in the soil which is mulched and has that deep. I really like deep watering, and often like to leave the sprinkler on for 2 or 3 hours in the one spot, and then of course won't come back to it again for at least a week, so that you've got nice deep moisture in the soil and it makes the roots go deeper. And the deeper the roots go, the more resilient the plants are going to be in the dry time.
If you can provide walls for shade, that will make a world of difference to the conditions of the plant in the summertime. We have quite a lot of elements here. I only have one corner that is a little bit shady, but basically everything is out in the sun all day long. And for this year at least we've had some rain. I always wish for rain so I don't have to water in the summertime.
But ultimately, having a large garden is your choice, and you do it because you actually love gardening and love being in the garden. It's a lifestyle choice. There's a lot of people that spend their time, or have in the past, spent their time travelling around the world and forgetting about their own garden and their own environment. They just have a bare yard and a house while they go off to resorts and enjoy other parts of the world. But we prefer to actually improve our home environment, and then we don't need to travel like that, and really don't want to so much, because you can't find anything much better than you have at home. So I think that's a better choice, and it's certainly a more sustainable choice, because traveling isn't economically a good thing, nor is it environmentally a good thing.
If you have a beautiful place to come home to, it just makes the world of difference to your mind. If you can go home, and even if you have a little town block and you can have a garden in that, there are people that have balconies and they have a garden in their balcony to make their mind feel better, that they have something green, something flowering around them, something to enjoy for when the spring comes and the little shoots pop up. Wherever you live, you can have a garden, and it makes the world of difference to your mind.
Hopefully those points have been some assistance to you. Thanks for watching, and we'll be back with another video soon.